Before the world knew the King of Rock, with his touch, his voice, his riffs, he was already born accompanied by someone who would never see the light of day. Elvis did not come into the world alone. He arrived to the sound of crying, only to carry an eternal silence. This video will reveal his name and the shadow that followed Elvis his entire life. Get ready to meet Jessie Garon Presley. Few people know this, but the story of Elvis Presley, the man the world would come to call the King of Rock, begins marked by an event that many fans do not know in depth. Before Elvis existed as the legend who would transform music, there was another name, another baby, another destiny that was never fulfilled. Jessie Garon Presley, Elvis's twin brother. This is a part of the story that explains much about the emotional, spiritual, and even psychological roots of the artist who would emerge years later. It all begins on January 8, 1935, in the small town of Tupelo, Mississippi. It was a poor region, a forgotten point on the map of the United States, during the height of the Great Depression, where thousands of families struggled daily to survive. The Presley home was extremely simple, built by Vernon Presley himself, Elvis's father, with his own hands. 2 rooms, cold floors, narrow walls, and many hardships. The family had practically nothing but faith, hard work, and the hope of better days. On that cold January dawn, Gladys Presley went into labor. They were expecting only one baby, but it quickly became clear that they would be twins. The first to be born was Jessie Garon Presley. He came into the world lifeless. He did not breathe, did not cry, did not open his eyes. Jessie's arrival was marked by a deep silence, a silence that would accompany the family's story forever. Approximately 35 minutes later, the second baby was born, Elvis Aaron Presley. Unlike Jessie, Elvis cried loudly, reacted, breathed, lived. Gladys held that child with an intense mixture of pain and relief. She had lost one and received another. Life and death dividing the same minute, the same mother, the same womb. And since we are here at the most significant moment of this beginning, I want to know your opinion. Do you believe Jessie's loss emotionally influenced Elvis's life and career? Leave your comment below. Your perspective is very important for us to continue this discussion. This event was never just a biographical detail. It became a central point in the emotional construction of Elvis. Throughout his life, Elvis grew up as an only child, but carried the spiritual weight of having been a surviving twin. Many scholars point out that Jessie's absence left deep marks on the family dynamic. For Gladys, Elvis was not just a son, he was the living representation of what she lost and what she managed to preserve. This created a very strong bond between mother and son, more intense than usual, almost symbiotic. Gladys's overprotection had roots in that initial loss, and Elvis grew up in an environment where he was cared for as something precious, almost sacred. Because he represented more than a child, he was the survivor of a pair that never came to exist. Elvis's childhood was marked by extreme poverty, but also by a strong sense of spirituality. The Presley family was very connected to the Assembly of God Church, where Elvis had his first contact with music. As a child, he listened to hymns, choirs, and gospel melodies that awakened his musical sensitivity. But scholars also point out that Elvis showed, from an early age, a certain introspection, an emotional depth that seemed uncommon for a child. Many believe part of this sensitivity came from the condition of being a twin without a pair, something that, even without being rationally understood, seemed to inhabit his identity from early on. As the years passed, Elvis showed a mixture of shyness and desire to please. He was a quiet boy who felt different, out of place, and sought ways to express who he was. Music became the perfect channel. In local contests, he already displayed deep emotional expression. At home, he practiced for hours with his first guitar, a gift he received at age 11. Music seemed to fill something that was missing, something that had no name, but that he carried in his heart since birth. This early phase of the Presley family's life shows how the family context and Jessie's silent loss shaped not only the beginning of Elvis's trajectory, but also the heart of the artist who would later captivate the world. The King of Rock did not emerge solely from talent and opportunity. He was born into an environment marked by pain, faith, poverty, resilience, and an absence so strong that, even without physically existing, it deeply influenced his story. The narrative of Elvis and Jessie's birth reveals that before any success, brightness, or fame, there was an emotional scar that followed Elvis until his final days. It was not the story of two twins, it was the story of a boy who was born alone but never stopped feeling that he should have been two. The story of Elvis Presley is often told through his records, his shows, and his cultural impact, but there is a silent chapter that deeply shaped the man before the myth. The absence of Jessie Garon Presley, his stillborn twin brother, was not just a tragic event at birth. It was an emotional shadow that accompanied Elvis throughout his entire life, influencing his personality, his relationships, his spirituality, and especially the intensity with which he lived and sang. Although Elvis rarely spoke openly about Jessie, the theme was part of the family's intimate identity. Gladys Presley, Elvis's mother, felt deeply the loss of the first baby. This pain never disappeared and influenced the way she raised Elvis. To her, he was not just the only son, but also the constant reminder of what had been lost. This family context created an extremely strong, almost symbiotic bond between mother and son. Gladys saw Elvis as someone special, protected, almost destined for something greater. This feeling of a miracle child accompanied Elvis from early on, and he internalized this narrative deeply. Experts who study the psychology of twins point out that individuals who lose their twin before or shortly after birth may carry a feeling of incompleteness, as if a part of themselves is missing. This concept is known as the surviving twin phenomenon. Elvis seems to have been a remarkable example of this experience. People close to him reported that he had above-average sensitivity and intimate loneliness that did not match his public image. Even surrounded by friends, fans, and family, Elvis often showed signs of introspection and emotional vulnerability. The way Elvis related to the world may have been influenced by this primordial emptiness. He had a constant need to be loved, admired, and recognized, as if trying to fill an internal void impossible to reach. This emotional search can be perceived both in his personal behavior and in his artistic expression. When Elvis stepped on stage, there was an intensity that seemed to come from a very deep place. It was not just performance. It was almost as if he were trying to fill something, reach something that always slipped through his fingers. Jessie's loss also reinforced Elvis's spiritual connection. He grew up in a highly religious environment and from an early age demonstrated a strong relationship with faith, destiny, and purpose. The idea that his life had a special meaning was something repeated by his mother and by the family environment. Elvis carried with him the notion that he was alive for a greater reason. This belief may have influenced both his humility and his confident posture on stage. It was as if, deep down, he believed he was born with some kind of spiritual mission, a mission that, in some way, also belonged to the brother who could not live. Throughout his life, Elvis displayed behaviors that reflected the duality between strength and fragility. In moments of glory, he was exuberant, magnetic, and full of energy. But behind the scenes, many reported that he showed himself to be deeply human, needy, sometimes insecure. This mixture of public greatness with intimate vulnerability is one of the aspects that most fascinates his fans today. He was a giant star, but also a man marked by an absence he could never fully explain. Gladys's death in 1958 was an emotional turning point for Elvis. She was his safe haven, the figure who carried the memory of Jessie and the emotional meaning of that loss. When she passed away, Elvis entered one of the hardest phases of his life. Losing his mother was for him almost like losing the final link to the twin brother he never knew. Friends and biographers reported that Elvis became more introspective after this loss, carrying even more intensely the weight of his family history. It is impossible to separate Elvis's art from his emotional history. Every note he sang, every expression of pain or longing, every spiritual vibration of his gospel songs had deep roots in his intimate experience. Elvis's vocal delivery, famous for its unmistakable emotion, can be interpreted as the echo of a soul divided between presence and absence, between life and loss. Understanding the impact of Jessie's absence is not just learning a biographical curiosity, it is understanding the essence of Elvis Presley's humanity. The King of Rock was not just a stage icon. He was a man marked from birth, carrying a story that could never be fully told in interviews or documentaries. Looking at his life from this perspective, it becomes clear that Elvis's emotional journey began long before fame. It began in the silence of that humble room in Tupelo, at the moment when the world gained a genius and lost, at the same time, the brother who might have shared the stage with him. Now that we have reached the end of this profound chapter in Elvis's life, I want to hear from you. In your opinion, how did this absence shape the sensitivity, personality, and artistic soul of the King of Rock? Leave your comment. It enriches this debate and helps this story reach even further. When we talk about Elvis Presley, it is easy to think of the brightness, the crowded stages, the films, the records, and the cultural impact he left on the world. But behind all this magnetism, there was an emotional depth that often goes unnoticed by more casual fans. The absence of Jessie Garon Presley was not an isolated event buried in the distant past of the family. It became part of the emotional identity that shaped Elvis throughout his entire life, silently influencing his relationships, decisions, insecurities, and even his connection with the public. The legacy of Jessie begins in the very way Elvis's life became an almost mythological narrative. Among his fans, there is a strong perception that Elvis seemed to carry a heavier, more intense soul, as if there were inside him two voices, one that sang to the world and another that tried to fill an internal space left at the moment of birth. Some scholars of Elvis's life argue that this duality was one of the reasons he seemed to have such extreme sensitivity. It was as if he felt the weight of being unique while at the same time incomplete. This sense of duality can be perceived in interviews, in statements from close friends, and especially in the nuances of his art. The absence of Jessie also helped shape Elvis's deep spirituality. From an early age, he developed a worldview marked by mystery, destiny, and faith. It was not uncommon for Elvis to show interest in topics related to the soul, life's purpose, and spiritual questions. He read books on philosophy and religion and sought answers about the meaning of existence. Many close to him reported that Elvis believed a greater force was guiding his life, as if he were fulfilling a calling that somehow belonged not only to him but also to the brother who could not live. This idea of a spiritual mission accompanied him silently, reinforcing the feeling that his life had an almost sacred purpose. Another important point is how Jessie's absence affected the public's perception of Elvis after his death. Fans, biographers, and researchers often revisit this part of his past to try to understand some of the complexities of his personality. The image of Elvis as a man divided between strength and fragility finds its origin exactly on the day of his birth. It is as if the world had received only half of what should have come, and this created an aura of mystery around his figure. This is not about creating fantastical theories or exaggerated speculations, but about recognizing that deep emotional realities can have a real impact on a person's development. Jessie's absence also influenced the way fans emotionally connect with Elvis. Many people who follow his career and his story feel empathy for this deeply human and painful detail. Knowing that Elvis was born marked by such a great loss transforms the way we interpret his art. His songs of love, longing, spiritual search, and even joy carry a deeper emotional background when we understand that, from the first day of life, he experienced a form of loneliness that few people know.
This knowledge creates a powerful emotional bond between the artist and his admirers, who come to see not only the singer, but the man behind the voice.
Jessie's legacy is not manifested in monuments, recordings, or photographs. It lives in what Elvis carried internally and in the indirect impact that this loss had on his work. Even without having lived, Jessie became part of the emotional biography of one of the greatest artists in history. His absence shaped the family environment, influenced Elvis's upbringing, determined the intensity of the bond with his mother, and may have been one of the origins of the deep sensitivity that characterized the artist. Meanwhile, the other side of this legacy is what it reveals about the human condition. The story of Elvis and Jessie reminds us that even the greatest legends are not untouchable. Behind all fame, there is a real story, often marked by quiet losses and silent pain. This understanding humanizes Elvis and allows us to see him not only as an extraordinary figure, but as someone who intensely experienced feelings that many of us also face: emptiness, doubt, the search for meaning, and the desire to find a place in the world. The silent legacy of Jessie Garon is not measured in concrete facts, but in the emotional imprint that helped sculpt one of the most influential careers in music history. Even without taking a single step on earth, his absence echoed for decades and helped shape the soul of Elvis Presley. And perhaps that is why the story of the two twins remains so fascinating. It is not just the story of the birth of the greatest rock icon. It is the story of a life that began divided and, despite that, found a way to touch millions of other lives. The story of Elvis Presley has always been much greater than records, films, or historic performances. It is a human story, marked by losses, choices, faith, talent, and a heart that carried much more than the world could see. And learning about this lesser-known part, the story of Jessie Garon, brings us closer to the man behind the legend. If this video brought you something new, touched your heart, or awakened even more admiration for Elvis, I invite you to continue this journey with me. Subscribe to the channel to follow more deep stories, curiosities, and analyses about the King of Rock and other musical icons. Activate notifications so you don't miss any new content. And if you are a true fan, leave your like right now. It shows YouTube that this story deserves to reach more people. Comment below what surprised you the most about this part of Elvis's life, and share this video with other fans who also carry affection and respect for everything he represented. The more people know this story, the more alive it remains.